Hi, this is Kaolin from The Essence of Transformation, and I'm very happy to be recording episode 10, which is the middle of chapter 3 of the book talking about race, a workbook about white people fostering racial equality in their lives, and also going on to chapter 3. Today is June 25th in 2025. I had written this book in the around 2008. Well, I've been working on it for a while, and it came out in 2010. And it's still sold, and you can get it on Amazon and other retail marketers. I noticed at the time when I was working on this subject and doing events that there was an enormous amount of denial about the severity of racism, that people felt that they were removed from it if they were white. Now, of course, there's a lot of truth to almost anything anyone can think about it at all, because we've relied on stereotypes all of our lives. We've been trained to believe in them. The educational system really has fostered them. And then when they began to really deal with it, now they're getting a lot of opposition, as if it shouldn't even be discussed in class. So I'm not going to get into all of that in this session. This show should go on, and it will go on with guests and experts in the field. But right now, this is just the preference, just a little bit of a prelude to this subject, which now is consuming. It's all consuming. Now, as far as I'm concerned, in the lives of the people of color I've known all my life, it's been all consuming all their lives. It's not something that you adapt to. If you are not able to expect and to live with civil rights and social justice, life is going to be harder. We understand that white privilege is something which essentially was saying that we're better than people of color, white people. And we deserve to have a multitude of advantages, because for some very bizarre reason, but also economical reasons, it's important for white people to prove that they're better than other people. I'm not going to get into that at length. Like I said, this is just my introduction to reading this material. But I would be remiss if I hadn't said that the times are exasperating. Not only are they incredibly violent and vile, but completely exasperating. And I notice in the collective consciousness of the generations of people that I know that it's been very detrimental to their health, to their physical health and mental health, and I actually think they're the same. And then to the emotional health. We're taught in this culture to see things as very separate, to see the mind-body connection as something separate. And yet, that's not the case. It's one whole piece of machinery. And I guess it's up to each individual to decide whether or not they believe that piece of machinery, human beingness, is divine or not. And that's another conversation for another day. What has surprised me in this culture, however, is how many therapeutic modalities there are, and yet how many people are in politics with very important positions who obviously have some very serious mental health issues. I would think if I was a therapist, I would have gotten other therapists together to be deeply involved in politics years ago, so that what we've ended up with wouldn't even be possible. But I also recognize that therapists are busy, and not everybody has a knack for that type of thing. I get it. But how discouraging, how completely and utterly discouraging, let alone petrifying, And that's all intentional, because that's what racism is. It's intentional. It's no accident. So I'm going to go back to the middle of chapter 3 and to page 51, because that's where I left off before. And I'm going to read the last thing I had finished, which was, you will experience fears with your defenses and insecurities as you work through racism. You experience doubts and delays all along the way, certain things that will be very hard to let go of. If you know what to expect, it may still knock you down, but you can get up, dust yourself off faster. Some of the things you should anticipate are a continuing desire for status, the temptation to give in to apathy, the need for control, and finally, the related need to compete. The desire for status. Our desire for status often feeds racism. We want to be better than, higher than, smarter than, purer than, and racism supplies the bottom half of that dichotomy. As long as we need status, for whatever reason, racism is attractive. We may be motivated at one level to transform ourselves by doing this work, but at another level, we'd secretly like to keep everything just as it is. The need for status undermines the new identity, so it's important to know just how important status is to you. The temptation of apathy. Apathy about racial equality work often replaces or preempts curiosity. Instead of assertion and transformation, we rely upon cushions that will not displace us. Racism is a cushion. As long as it is in place, we really do not have to do anything to change it. No one is obligated to care, and that is one fact that we are all aware of. Apathy is easy, and what's easy, let's admit it, is also tempting. But apathy doesn't really do the job. If we have chosen the cushion, then you might think racism doesn't bother us, but it does. It does anyway. People cringe when they are called a racist. They jump at their own defense. They convince themselves they are innocent and use that to justify their ignorance. But as we saw in chapter 3, innocence and ignorance are worlds apart. I'm going to repeat that. Innocence and ignorance are worlds apart. Questioning the guidance of power, the imbalance of power between ourselves and people of color, we realize we have been duped. We have been duped into the notion that racism is unmanageable and not our fault. Yet we see evidence of the contrary all around us. Therefore, it's in our coping skills, and it's in being convinced that we cannot master them nor develop the racial equality muscle. We have created a psychology that convinces us that we have plenty of time to deal with this problem. But what are we waiting for? Perhaps we are waiting for the pain of racism we witness in others to go away, so we can work it out when we are gone, when we are no longer obligated. Maybe it is too painful to see through the eyes of racism, and yet when we look at others, we see it so clearly, we cannot succumb to apathy. Maybe we are afraid to demolish the myths about ourselves. We put it off, fearing that once the dust clears, we may find that we have very little of our old selves left. Do you believe there has been a delay in solving these particular problems? Why? The need for control. In claiming to love ourselves while bonding together, the myth of superiority, we have developed certain insecurities as a group: fear, guilt, anxiety, and shame. We are not entirely able to redirect these, and so they must be controlled. The appearance of being in control, in fact, defines us. It gives us a common identity and gives our communities a semblance of purposefulness. In a very real sense, this need for control is who we are. You can see how even as our new identity takes form, we might cling to the rags of the old. We might cling to the rags of the old, but remember that control is linked to this continuing existence of racism. So while we are suffering through our egos, our vanity, what we may lose, what we may choose to give up, what might be taken away from us, you have to realize how many portions of the population are being killed, are being starved to death, are not being educated. So you may not want to ponder these issues for too long a time and kind of get down to the work of it and create some changes in your life that reflect the fact that you're not a racist. The drive to compete. White people were against civil rights because they understood that disassembling white privilege would eventually disrupt their comfort zones and remove assurances that their children's futures would be comfortably laid out for them. In white families, those expectations were not unreasonable. That is why, within many a white household, racial equality and fear may be synonymous. If there was no disenfranchisement based on color alone, white people would be competing with people they had never competed with before in areas such as access to jobs and education. Housing and health care. White people were supposed to be winners, and we do not give up this notion without a struggle. Where did we get this idea? We got this idea from European culture. When we discussed competition among white people in class, it seemed students believed what was missing was most among whites was a spiritual identity that was not dependent upon someone else's oppression. One student hoped for increased clarity of vision and understanding. Another said, "We seem to have a love of death over life, violence over peace, rape over love, and greed over solidarity." To this list, I would add that we have a love of competition over cooperation. While this may come from anxieties and insecurities, it is such a core part of white personality in our dealings with other white people, as well as with people of color, that I want to look more closely at it through an experience I had while working on this book. I am not competing with you. White people's habit of competition is not laid at the door when we work on the racism problem. While writing this book, I met another white woman who was working on racism. She told me about workshops she had been running in the community and how frustrated she was by the poor attendance. She said she felt defeated. I agreed that it was hard work and started to tell her about this book and the students I've been privileged to teach. She interrupted me angrily. "Yes, but you are teaching people who want to be taught." Her body language got as hard as a rock, and she actually glared at me. It took me by surprise, and I could see why people were not showing up for her workshops. We were not doing the same kind of work, so her hostility really took me by surprise. But it shouldn't have. I have noticed over the years that white-on-white relationships are often competitive. I pointed out that our conversation on racial equality seemed to be revolving not around either of the populations we were trying to serve, but I told her I wasn't competing with her. She became silent. Those words were powerful among white people. They are powerful. I'm not competing with you. I think this is a thread that many of us keep experiencing in our relationships to one another. And it's something to just pay attention to and work on. If we're such winners, why are we doing that all the time? So here's a workbook writing 3B, page 54. Where do you have high status? School, work, your family, neighborhood, religious community? Where is your status low? Number 2, do you have unearned status in any part of your life? As firstborn, for example, or as grandparents? A grandparent's favorite grandchild? Have you ever been conflicted about this unearned status? What would you do to keep it? What have you done? And 3, when and how did winning first become important to you? So that is the end of chapter 3. I like chapter 3. It's about defenses and insecurities. Why? Because racism is deeply personal. It's not some kind of an aesthetic. It's not an ideology. It's deeply personal. The impact of your life upon somebody else's life is very important. Your belief systems are important, and if that wasn't the case, you wouldn't bother speaking to anybody. You wouldn't be in any relationships. And that's no different from our relationship to racism and how it may be controlling us and controlling others. Here is chapter 4, Responsibility and White Privilege. This is from a student in class who said, "This fear to stand up for oneself and to know your boundaries when someone has threatened you is something I have been dealing with lately and have really been dealing with for a long time. But even more so right now, I see women of color do it often, even with humor. I am so used to seeing this as a lack of survival skills in white women, but now I believe it may be the effect of an abundance of privilege." Now this is a white student, and she happened to have come from Texas. Have you ever wondered yourself how one person of color can represent all people of color wherever they go? That has not happened to white people, has it? You are never referred to as the white woman who came into the store to buy juice, the white player who just joined the team, or the white teacher who taught class the other day. White people tend to retain our individual identities. We can excel without the assumption that we have to bring the rest of us up a notch in class or status. We can take full credit for our accomplishments and carry that independent credit with us wherever we care to go. If we mess up, we do that on our own too. It doesn't reflect on all white people. This is one of the privileges that we enjoy as white people. People of color do not have this privilege. Divisions have been drawn between us, and that dividing took a good deal of violence in the first place. We may experience fear and loss when we contemplate letting go of our privilege in order to build a world where racial equality is a norm. Tanya's imagined future. Tanya was a student who worked in earnest, just as the others had. She was white and a bit reserved. She believed her whiteness not only gave her certain privileges, but would buffer her from integration. And by buffer, I mean protect her from integration. She thought that her role would remain intact for good. It might, but it might not. It wasn't easy for her to understand that integration and multicultural influences are here to stay. Tanya had this to say about herself and white privilege. I feel as an educated, articulate person of privilege, I have a responsibility to do what I can to help ease the racism problem. The black gang member, for example, is more concerned with survival and not race relations. I think, as a future teacher or writer, I have an excellent forum for presenting a more realistic portrayal of racism and and a positive portrayal of accomplishment of people other than white people. Tanya has begun to listen to others talk about race. She has begun to share her own opinions about it in class and to see her position within it, all for the first time in her life. As I had mentioned, she is white. She is also self-conscious about the awareness she has of herself regarding her privilege. Tanya did not know enough about gangs to claim to understand what they care about most. She certainly did not know enough about them to speak of their concern for survival, to the exclusion of their experience of race relations. Tanya is imagining them based upon the stereotypes she is accustomed to. And of course, she's speaking of gangs of color. This is a leap many of us take in this process. We see our role in racism, we see our white privilege, and often believe we will maintain it even as a new knowledge of ourselves changes us, opening us up to our wounds and our confusion about racism. This happens even when racism bothers us and we believe it is wrong to benefit from it. In her account, Tanya reminds us that she is in the privileged position. She may feel this position is temporary or that is dependent upon her racism. Tanya may not be convinced that her status is permanent. However, the more she exposes herself to this subject, the more she clings to that privilege. But at the same time, she is also beginning to observe and wonder about the real people who are disadvantaged because they are of color in her world and in the specific context especially. Tanya's gang raises a gang of questions. Tanya's entry raises the following questions. While Tanya examines herself within the context of racism and inequality, why is she referring to gangs at all? Is she feeling threatened by this examination of her privilege? Is she insecure, guilty, afraid? Does bringing gangs into the picture make her fantasies about her future look brighter? Did she mention gangs to provide a contrast to what she hopes her life and her career will become? Or is Tanya bringing up gangs because she is changing and identifying with people of another class, color, and circumstance? Maybe Tanya has found a way to include a marginalized group in her process because she is aligning herself with an aspect of the disenfranchisement she is studying about in class in preparation for her knowledge and change. At this point in her comments, do you think she may be scared of identifying with the history she has begun to study in class? Are gangs being used as a metaphor to let her fear become a part of her education? Or are the strengths of the African American people she is learning about in class becoming too much for her? Perhaps she wants to strengthen her perceived weakness. And mentioning gangs might be a way of bringing another form of power and even intimidation to the subject as a way of protecting herself. Has Tanya managed to invade a still sacred place within her by bringing in gangs to contrast her inheritance of privilege and her fantasies about her future? Does Tanya retain an element of control over the other students and the teacher by seeing herself as a teacher and planning to impart her wisdom in a future classroom rather than containing or rather continuing, to remain a member of the current classroom that is being challenged by talk of racism, talk which may be weakening her opinion of herself. Challenging white privilege confuses us. Because we examine racism from one perspective does not mean we can assume we are examining it from multiple perspectives. We simply do not have the layers of information and experience about anything but our own position, and that is not enough. Tanya showed me that she was confused about herself. Given the content of the class so far, she had every reason to be. Her foundation of white privilege was being challenged by history. She equated the racism African Americans face with gangs, but she was really speaking of her own fear. Tanya fears her desire for racial equality because she is finding out there is a lot that she does not know. Maybe she does not even know enough about racism to have a right to desire racial equality just yet. She may be disappointed in herself already, or in the reality of the situation she is in. There are no quick fixes where racism is concerned. Is it possible Tanya has more to consider and more to see about herself and her identity than she may care to know? Yes, it is. In many ways, the real work is just beginning for her. The more you care, the more you learn about what it can cost you. Tanya began to wonder, how serious is this? What will my interest in this cost me? The danger that concerns her is not necessarily physical danger, but psychic. For instance, what if Tanya is not in the position of teacher or writer someday? What if Tanya has no excellent forum from which to present all she would like to present to others while in a power position? Would that be the end of her involvement in incorporating the ideals of today into her future? It seems possible that if her plans go awry, then her politics, good intentions, her desire to inform, educate, and compensate for the guilt she feels because she is entitled, could just fall apart. Letting go of the fairy tale ending, or if not now, when? You will notice as you read this book how a realization that occurs in one instant can become the lesson of a lifetime. You may experience deep feelings of loss as you uncover the roots of racism within yourself and what that racism means to others. Sometimes you feel lost in this process and you cannot be sure why or what loss might mean to you. Tanya thought she would become a teacher or a writer and present a more realistic portrayal of racism and a positive portrayal of accomplishments of people other than white. This is very nice and a common thread among white people. It is what I refer to as a fairy tale ending. The fairy tale ending is just a more narcissistic version of the learned helplessness introduced in Chapter 1. It says that we might really do something about racism, the racism problem, something really big and lasting, but not yet. It's a fantasy that makes us the empowered one with gifts and abilities that give us a missionary-like access to desirable strangers. This way of thinking is a conditioned response to what we have been spoon-fed about ourselves. It implies that there is nothing we can do right now today. It implies that we need a larger, unsuspecting population to present our point of view to. And furthermore, that those imaginary people will actually be receptive to our point of view. But none of that is guaranteed, and you may not end up in a position of authority anyway. Oftentimes, we want to come out of an experience with all we can gain from having it, and yet remain untouched by it, unchanged. But in this work, that cannot happen. A radical discontinuity is inevitable, giving us access to living our truth today and every day, no matter what else we do in our lives. Only Tanya can figure that out, what she needs to do in the groups she is part of, where inequality based on color exists. She needn't wait until she is out of college, or a teacher, or a writer, or anything else. Racism needs to be addressed in a formal setting as much as it needs to be addressed in an informal setting. Change takes place in social settings as much as it needs to take place in our most private relationships. We hope our sense of self will not be challenged. I gave Tanya this response to her entry. It seems useful for you to believe your politics will not be compromised and that you may not have to pay a price for disagreeing with others about racism, just as it is useful to see yourself in a role that does not inhibit you but does allow you to teach because you'd like to impart others with your wisdom and truth. You also want to be able to exhibit your fair-mindedness and sensitivity to racial prejudice to help your class so no one is subjected to racism in your classroom. Towards the end of the list of your concerns, you paused because balancing an adversarial position can be as taxing as it can be exhilarating. You have funneled a sense of outrage and fear and can see that justified anger cannot be removed from racism. You are at the center of these realizations in the world you inhabit, and yet you fear your fear of what you are finding out, and it is warranted. When a person evaluates oneself within the institutionalized racism they have inherited, they often do begin to look at how others have managed to navigate their way through that which oppresses them as well. From what you have told me about yourself, you have a limited knowledge of African American history, and a limited knowledge of gangs. I am glad you shared that with me, as your knowledge of yourself is what I have asked you to pay attention to and take into consideration in the work you are doing on racism. You have begun to work the racial equality muscle by drawing the analogy you chose, sharing it with me, and considering the feedback I am giving you today. Now I'd like you to take your work a step further by having you write me your plans for today and how racial equality plays into those plans. Tanya had a lot to think about. As the course continued, I grew to admire her step-by-step process of growth, the manner in which she remained aware of her fears, and how well she integrated the knowledge she gained in class with her own original intent. That intent was to find out how to recognize racism and have that recognition change her. Before the course was over, Tanya began an Amnesty International club on campus that semester. We have come a long way. We have come a long way on our race journey in a short time. How did we do that? We started with what we know. We know we are part of an imbalance of power and a violence that sickens us. We know that we internalize a problem we have been told has nothing to do with us, but we have decided it has everything to do with us. We know we have been told we cannot fix it, but we believe we can, and we will. We know that we are a part of a problem because we benefit from it, and we see that scenario played out again and again in our lives. We know we cannot change the color of our skin, so we must find other ways to change our lives and people's opinions of us as we work toward racial equality. White people revisit racist assumptions. Tanya believed that she understood multiculturalism better than she had before taking the class, and it is possible that she did. But does her knowledge of African American history give her knowledge of black gangs? No. Yet, somehow, her understanding of gangs has been merged with her understanding of black culture. Even as she gained some racial maturity, she reverted at times to racist assumptions. As we saw in the previous chapters, we learn these assumptions very early. They have deep roots in our families, in family dynamics, which in turn have deep roots in America's legacy of slavery. We cannot expect to pull these roots up overnight. Consider how racism and white privilege has already shaped our lives. Acknowledge the extent to which we depend upon people of color and the deprivation racism imposes upon them. Is it a reflection of the inadequacy of our inner selves as white people? I'm going to repeat that. We need to acknowledge the extent to which we depend upon people of color and the deprivation racism imposes upon them. Is it a reflection of the inadequacy of our own inner lives, our own inner selves as white people? You must wonder. How we view ourselves depends upon the existence of and the continuation of racism. Take racism and privileges it gives us away, and we would be completely lost. And it is now 2025, and just look at how hysterical people are, and look at how desperately they're taking away the promises of racial equality and the work that has been done on this. It's not going to work. It will not work. But you see it every day. Now imagine this. In the first 12 years of your life, you were considered perfectly normal. Then you meet someone else who for the past 12 years was raised to believe that she or he is not. How do you suppose you would think about yourself in relation to this other person, especially over a period of 20 years, or 40, or 60, or 80? You would probably see them as less normal than you are, or as if there was something wrong with them. For the individual who was not raised with layers of acceptance, privilege, and approval, you can see the awful impact inequality would have on them. You can also see how it is that disintegration of racism would take time, because this is still the picture of the world that is being presented to us again and again, and we do not stop it. We could have stopped it. We did not stop it. We continue to watch programs, read literature, and go to movies that promote racism. A student wrote, "I know if I was of color today, I would have to prove myself wherever I go. But how could I do that? Which part of me would be able to be pulled out for approval?" I realized in this class that would depend upon where I was going, what I was going for, and who would be there. I don't think I'd go out much at all. I cannot imagine having lived like that. I'd have to break rank and allow myself to be hated. I'd have to allow myself to draw the needed distinctions between myself and this amorphous white and defend consistently this position. We'll take a moment for that. Take a look at how important your whiteness is to others. It took many years for me to understand how important my whiteness was to others. I may have been 26 and the mother of two children before I saw the power it had over my relationships. I spent several more years hoping I was wrong, because the essence of white power for its own sake is so perverse that it's unbelievable to me. Now I am older. It has taken me even longer to come to my own understanding of white power. People of color do not have the luxury of 50 plus years to understand it for themselves. And I am white, and that is my opinion. And many people of color who read the book can disagree, and that's beautiful. Come on my show, we'll talk about it. They are not observers. They are subjected to it, and the difference between our two positions is vast. The filter of racism has penetrated their psyches long before it does a white person's psyche, and white people need to pay more attention than they do to anyone of color who is willing to speak about it. White people are often misunderstood psychically, spiritually, and morally within their own families and schools when we discuss racism, whereas people of color have each other to bond with against the same oppressor. We do not. We are the oppressor. We are in a white box. We are on the losing side of the argument, as there is no justification for our power, and we know it. We cannot be to each other what we might like to be, without feeling complicit, or appearing to be an opponent to whiteness in general, when that is not the case. We are hoping to unite, not affirm disunity. But where group dynamics regarding racism is concerned, we're almost instinctually pitted against each other. Can a white person survive without group dynamics validating their socially constructed superiority? We may not be able to change the color of our skin in order to reconcile this problem. We may not be able to rely upon one another either. Beyond reading and talking. The students' admission that racism exists in many of their relationships was very difficult for them in the beginning of the course, but I did not push them beyond their limits. I let their weekly responses, which had to be at least 3 pages long, be my guide. It took several classes before they began to speak with more spontaneity and fewer reservations. It was important that they learned how to talk about it, since knowledge and awareness help strengthen their resolve regarding racial equality. In order to resist peer pressure and society's norms, a person must know a great deal about racism to begin with. On page 64 is the workbook writing 4-A. Some questions for you to answer for yourself. Number 1, what does white privilege mean to you? Number 2, describe a time in your past when your whiteness seemed to be important to someone in a position of authority. Number 3, how would your life be different if whiteness became irrelevant? What would you lose? What would you win? What would you gain? Workbook writing 4B. What's in a word? Fill in your brief definition of the following words and phrases: blackmail, nightmare, black cat, black sheep, black flag, blackguard, blacklisted, blackout, white-collar worker, white elephant, white fish, white flag, whitewash, white out. We viewed films and read texts about the history of racism in the United States. These were useful, but the most valuable assignments were the more proactive. In one, I asked the students to go into an integrated environment intentionally, not that they hadn't been in one already, but this was part of the work in the class, where there were a significant number of people of color, and simply observe their expectations. They answered questions beforehand and wrote in their journals after. You'll soon have the chance to do the same. One of the students of color smiled about this exercise. Her name was Jackie. Jackie said she would not have much to write because she believed that no matter where she went, everyone would separate themselves automatically, whites with whites and blacks with blacks. But on the whole, there was a lot of enthusiasm for this exercise from the students of color, who were convinced that it was a good way for the white students to see what the students of color came up against whenever they were into integrated environments, which is to say, nearly every class, every day. And at this time, we were all living in Western Massachusetts. Taking responsibility for white privilege. Some things to think about. It would be nice if our actions were not representing any person or group, but as you get involved, you will be representing racism, the pros and cons of it, wherever you go. It would also be nice if our actions were not challenging anyone else's. It wouldn't be real, but it would be nice. It would be nice if one seeking inclusion with others of a different ethnicity did not invite the rejection of so many white people who imply you are inadequate. It would also be nice if white people's role models did not conflict with the vision of equality you have in mind for yourself. But of course, that is the implication of the vision you carry. When we integrate, we are doing other cultures. When we integrate, are we doing other cultures a favor? Hardly. Can we be taken advantage of? Definitely. Can we get caught up in becoming a representative of whiteness and all that it could be? Could you become a caricature of yourself, a stereotype? Sure. People of color know what is real and what is not. They have been aware of white people for centuries. When you integrate as part of a process of finding out more about others and yourself, the self that has not become submerged in whiteness through its prejudices, it will be obvious to others that you are working the racial equality muscle. Now we're on page 68, and this is an assignment. Choose an integrated place or event to visit. There should be a significant number of people of color there. And if you're of color, of white people, of course. Before you go, write answers to these questions. What do you expect to see and feel? How do you expect to be treated? What other expectations do you have? Describe any insecurities or worries you're feeling. Describe any hopes you hold. While you're involved with your integrated outing, pay attention to details that have anything to do with race and racism. Afterward, write about your experiences. Which of your expectations were met? I'll repeat that. Which of your expectations were met? Which were not? For example, did everyone get along? Was there any racism? Were you self-conscious if you, as a white person, were in the minority? If you are of color, did you notice that other students of color tended to stay together? Were the interactions among most of those present inclusive? Did any of your insecurities or worries prove warranted? Were any hopes realized? We're going to go on with a few more questions. Number 1. Can people of color avoid being subjected to racism? Do you believe anyone of color can avoid being affected by racist norms in this culture? If you were a person of color How do you suppose racism would affect you? With respect to your own color, would you say you were born lucky? Do your relationships depend upon invisibility to keep them going? If you do not pay attention to the color of my eyes, does that mean we are more alike than we might otherwise be? If not, why not? How does this affect your relationship to other white people when you talk about me? If it is too uncomfortable to see me as I am, what kind of relationship do we have? Does being white mean you have it made? Do you think white people have no problems? If you are a person of color, do you believe white people owe you something? I would have to draw the line with name and ethnic group when it comes to marriage because. So of course you would fill in what would you have to draw the line about when it comes to marriage with a specific ethnic group and why. An assumption drawn by others about me racially is, fill that in. Institutionalized racism reinforces what? Having a contact sheet of activists would be, write it down. Let's pretend you have brown eyes. Do you want that fact to be completely unimportant or overlooked in your relationships? In a sense, that question has to do with how much more do you need to reduce yourself, the truth of who you are, in order to gain approval from anybody else, most especially cross-culturally. Here we go on to question 16, which is on page 74. If you're willing to be diminished by anybody, if you're willing to become less important as who you really are, to appease another culture, let's say, would that mean that you do not want to see yourself for who you are? How do you juggle that duality? If you don't have self-approval, will there be self-approval from someone else for you? Is that what you want? Does mentioning you don't care about color imply you're not a racist? I will repeat that. Does mentioning you do not care about color imply that you are not a racist? When we see the difference in color among us, why would that suggest we are racist? In order to correct a racist situation, I would need what? What would you need in order to correct a racist situation? How would you handle that? What do you need? And there's more. I wish I was lighter because being Hispanic is easier than being African American because I am white. I would have rather been born. Do we miss anything when we assume oppression is only experienced by Black people and that all Black people interpret their oppression in the same way? Number 25. If you believe we don't, why do you believe that? Number 26. If you believe we do, what do you believe we miss out on? Then, are there distinctions to be made about racial oppression, just as there are about gender and class oppression? Have you ever seen a film with an all-Black cast? This was written quite a while ago. There are quite a few more films out. but I'm still including that question. Do you dissect and analyze black films with an all black cast as you do films with an all white cast? That would be documentary material. But think about it. Do you dissect and analyze black films with an all black cast the same way you do an all white cast? If your answer to that question is no, why not? And why are most sitcoms white? That's changed quite a bit, but think about it and write about it. If you don't like that most sitcoms are all white, what can you do about it? That also goes with restaurants. What can you do? If there's a lack of integration and you're uncomfortable with that, would you feel free to go up to the manager or to the owner? Say, why is it so segregated? Excuse me. Can you do whatever your solution to question number 20 was today? Number 20. I'm going to go to number 20 and repeat it. Here we go. Number 20 was, in order to correct a racist situation, I would need, okay, what would you need? I like that question because you begin to frame your intentions with the very sensible reality of what to do. So when you're in those situations, you know in advance what steps you can take. And that makes a lot of sense because it can be very difficult to come up with something on the spot. Then you can feel, regretful afterwards. Like, gee, I should have really said this, or I should have asked that. Okay. But it's nice to know in advance. So, we're moving on to number 34. How does it change your point of view when you approach an analysis of black women in film, literature, and the media, and make race first in importance? And then what happens when you make it second in importance? Number 35. If you do not pay attention to the color of my eyes, does that mean we are more alike than we might otherwise be? If not, why not? This was a college course, so these were students who were 18, 19 to 22. And with all the dating and all of the new relationships they were having and their plans for their future and what they were hoping for, these questions really applied to those aspects of socialization. And here's number 36. How does it affect your relationship to other white people when you talk about race? What happens? If it is too uncomfortable to see me as I am, what kind of relationship do we have? So, of course, I'm white. I could write several books on my relationships. Excuse me. Actually, I have several manuscripts on that. And one book's going to get published in 26. But it's interesting because once you're conscious of racism and you take that with you, that consciousness, a lot of people are very intimidated by it. Not only white people, people of color. And then you get sort of, you're looked at differently. And then what you have to say has more importance than it may have had otherwise. People are used to really not caring and not discussing it. It's almost like a habit. It's like, oh, you're going to go there. Oh my God. Okay. But anyway, gradually, the more it is your style, and more important it is to you, it's just extremely interesting to see how people respond to that. It really, really is. So, what do you think acknowledging someone because of their color? Why do you think it's wrong to do that? Is it wrong to say this black guy or woman? Is it wrong to be identifying people according to their ethnicity? In the 1900s, 1990s, and let's see, there are different trends every decade about what's appropriate or inappropriate, what's cool and what's not, what's offensive, what's not. So it'll be interesting to think about how you would bring this up to people you want to know better, and what you're prepared for in their responses to it, and what you are kind of trying to work through also. Um, Also, what reading material are you going to be reading to work on this subject? If this is a subject you're seriously working on, I'll get into book material another time, but there's a lot of books on this subject. Okay. We're almost done with this episode number 10, chapter 4. As you discover the omission of the knowledge about the history of European white people, and such greats as Ida B. Wells and W.B. Du Bois, how does it make you feel about your own education so far? Of course, in education now, they're trying to strip these books away from curriculum. Not only trying to, they've managed to do that. I think it's all going to come back. I absolutely don't believe it's for good at all. However, it gives you a very strong indication of how powerful the history of blacks who have been fighting for racial equality is, which is why they're taking it out of the educational systems, because it is that powerful. Why? Because knowing one another is extremely powerful. The more alienated we are from one another, the less we know about one another, the happier the control systems are that are going to keep refusing civil rights and social justice. And that's why it becomes important to care, because the more you care and commit yourself to caring, you can see yourself no longer as a contributor to that kind of hostility, injustice, and rage, and also the violence of racism, which is in another chapter, but I'm going to move on here. But you understand that knowing one another is critically important. Rather than drawing assumptions about one another, knowing one another's history is very important, or history, and that's also extremely important. And it can be difficult to, and it can be painful to, but it's also enlightening, and it's also knowledge that you can take further into your life, which you have a right to. You have a right to knowledge, and to civil rights, and to social justice. The more knowledge you have, the more you can do about things. Just like the knowledge you had of racism, the students in the class who participated in the class. So they can get better, have more information, and learn how to deal differently and make very definite decisions about their own lives. Question 42. Do you lean toward feelings of ignorance, shame, anger, or betrayal about racism? Well, this book is about exploring those feelings, so you can do it right there. Do you feel protective, depressed, apathetic, or overwhelmed? You should. You could, and you should. That's all normal. Do the men or women in your life tend to affirm your intelligence or discredit it. I think one of the things about racism is, and when you're white, is when you have a real interest in it, a lot of white people get so scared that they want to think that you're stupid, you're never going to amount to anything, what a hopeless case you are. And so it can get you into the whole thing about what your self-esteem is really about. But it also gets into that competitive, are you going to be a success or are you going to be a failure? Are you going to be the line of the winners or are you going to line yourself up with the losers? There's a real consciousness in white culture about that. Absolutely. And in other aspects of the book, which I'll be going into, we'll be discussing that even more. But you'll be a little more prepared to recognize the opposition is to keep control over populations of color. That's what it's all about. And it's all economic. It's really economic. But it's not only economic, it's psychological. And we'll get into that more throughout the book as well. So let's see, what else is there to say? Do the men and women in your life tend to affirm your intelligence or discredit it? I mentioned that before. It's important, but you'll have more positive self-esteem as a result of your efforts to pursue this. And one reason why it's difficult to discuss this among whites is because they don't do it. So you may be that white person who's actually doing this, who's taking it seriously, who's really navigating their way through this in opposition to racism. And all of it requires some degree of courage. And so you may want to write about that even right now. All right? All right. Next. Now answer okay. I wanted to ask you one more question. If you were to create a film telling the story of your life so far, what would it be? An action film? Documentary? Comedy? Or a tragedy? Why? What difference would the style you make when compared to other films? What would be distinctly different about the film about you? Not only that it's about you, but what else in that film would be distinctly different than any film you've ever seen so far? And who would be interested in it? What part of the population would be most interested in that film? Is the audience culturally diverse? If it is, why does the film appeal to a culturally diverse audience? If it doesn't, why doesn't it? So we're on page 82, and that is the end of chapter 4. I want to thank those of you who are listening to it. I recognize that this is a very challenging topic to listen to. It is thought-provoking. There's a lot of work to do in our culture, for our culture. What culture am I talking about? Human culture. We need a less violent culture. We need civil rights. We need social justice. It's what we need. And our children be better off for it. And the times have made it very urgent, just critical, so critical, to be as well thought out as possible about much of what I mentioned in chapter 3 and 4. So thank you very much, and I'll be back with episode 11, chapters 5 and 6. And I'm very happy to have done this today. I just want to send out a serious wish to all who are listening for peace today, an enhancement in your own communication skills, and more certainty about who you are, and more acceptance of change, and a greater humanity that you're actively participating in. Thank you very much.